Hello, and welcome to our webinar today, where we're going to be talking about the digital first law firm, the rise of the digital client journey. I'm Caroline Hill. I'm editor-in-chief of Legal IT Insider. Very much welcome today. I never know whether to let everyone sort of file in. We've got quite a lot of people listening in today, so really good to see you. I might just wait till we got everyone here before I do introductions. We've got a really great panel of speakers today who all come at digitization from a very different angle. So it promises to be a really lively discussion, I'm sure. First up, we have Professor Martin Spring from Lancaster University Business Management School. Martin leads a team of academics that has been granted 1.8 million to help law firms and accountancy practices adopt technology. Martin's previous projects have included scenario planning for the future world that law firms will operate in, and putting together a toolkit to help firms automate their processes. And his new project focuses on helping firms to adopt new technologies. Hi, Martin.
Hello, everyone.
Thanks for joining me. I have Dan Taylor, who is a partner and director of integration at Fletcher's Group. He's been leading the firm's work with the University of Liverpool on AI under a knowledge transfer partnership. And Dan and his team have automated part of the selection process for medical negligence claims using AI. And we'll come on to hear a little bit about that. Hi, Dan.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I have Alex Hamilton, who is CEO and founder of Radiant Law, which set out to transform the way that the contracting process was conducted. Alex says that document automation is now table stakes, and he's currently working on completely unified data layer, not automating, but says the objective is to take out administrative tasks, not replace human contact. Hi, Alex.
Hi.
And last but not least, Glenn Rea, who's Global Sales Director at Advanced, which is helping law firms to digitize their practices. Before Advanced, Glenn was at Thomson Reuters for over 11 years, and he has an in-depth understanding of the legal market from talking to law firms day in, day out. Is that right, Glenn?
It is. That's what I live and breathe, Caroline. So good to be here, and afternoon, everyone.
Thanks very much for joining me. So thank you so much for joining us, and please enable your chat function. Say who you are, where you're listening in from, and we're going to, if you want to jump in with questions, we're really happy. We've got a really lively set of questions. I've got some questions for the panel. I'll probably ask them a question each, and then we'll sort of start discussing some of the topics, really pressing topics, which I think you'll find really interesting. But if you've got any questions, please jump in, put your question in the chat. Make sure it's to everyone. I do quite a lot of webinars and stuff on Zoom where people just put it to the host and panelists. So please make it for everyone so that I know that I can read your name out, or by all means, ask us privately and I'll still read it out, but just without saying who you are. I think it would be really good to, Martin, so I'll probably start with you. So in the project that you completed, was it 2 years ago?
Yes, about that, just over. Yeah.
Okay, so you worked with law firms. You've got two projects. So the one that you've just been given the award for, which I'm going to ask you a bit about at the end.
Yes.
But let's talk about the first one, because I think that's really interesting, because it led to where we are today, really. You spoke to law firms trying to understand how they use technology to modernize their practices. You've obviously found a vast array of capabilities, which we would be here talking about all day probably if we drilled into it. But tell us a bit about the design sprints that you did to help firms explore the art of the possible.
Yeah, and this was a project funded by the Economic and Social Research Council, and was part of a wider bit of funding to look at both the social science management organization aspect, which is what we were concentrating on, and some more technology oriented startup innovation, so funding startups to develop new technology. And our focus was very much on adoption, and we were a team of different from different areas of management and organization. But I had a colleague, Lucy Kimball, who's a design thinking expert, and that was the core of our design sprint approach. And it's increasingly fashionable, popular method in business and management, design thinking. So what we did was get firms together, probably typically 15 or 20 people, sometimes from one firm, sometimes from 2 or 3 firms, for a day. And this was pre-COVID. Part of it was pre-COVID. So in the good old days, we did it in person, and really went the clues in the word sprint, I think, quite quickly through exploring a business model. So starting with the purpose of innovation rather than the technology. And we didn't really major, in fact, on specific technologies at any point in the sprint process. So we had some existing innovation tools to help people, to stimulate people's thoughts on business model ideas, what they wanted to do with the technology, what was the purpose or a purpose. And then we worked more systematically on the interaction with clients, aspects of the business model, the delivery processes. And then so part of it is working through fairly systematically from a business purpose to a kind of an idea for an application. But occasionally we'd throw in some design thinking curveball. So we'd throw in the scenario idea at certain points in the day. We'd do things like ask them, what would your innovation be like if Donald Trump developed it, and trying to stimulate some thinking, original thinking. And I think the important thing was getting people from maybe HR, fee earners, technologists together from the same firm, who perhaps didn't always have the chance to explore things together and stimulate thoughts in that way. And the culmination of the day was to develop a physical artifact. So we gave people egg boxes, pasta, string, sealing wax, you name it, to create a vision of their idea for a technology application. And I think having something to point at and congregate round and play with really does help stimulate original thinking. And so that's the pattern of the day, and it resulted in quite a few things. I think a lot of firms were focused quite a lot on the interaction with the client rather than sort of back office kind of activities. And yeah, the day ended with groups presenting their weird and wonderful creations to one another and trying to explore what that meant for what they did next in a practical sense of seeking out technology adoption.
You didn't use Post-it notes then? Isn't that
like... they came into it somewhere, but no, we went beyond the Post-it note into the egg box. And
well, that's something to take forward for the Post-it note. So just briefly, so I know that you, out of that, you came up with a toolkit, which I'm curious as to what that means.
Yeah, I mean, we intended it really, and yeah, partway through the process, COVID started and we had to switch the design sprints online. I mean, they still worked okay, but no, we couldn't have the virtual egg box, and that kind of aspect of the interaction was a bit attenuated, let's say. But the toolkit was really captured most aspects of our project. So there was a kind of underlying more academic research aspect, which tried to catalogue some application approaches and ways in which firms that we'd seen had used technology for various applications, use cases. And we used that in the sprints to stimulate thinking among firms as to, which one of those archetypes might you try and emulate. So there's that element, and we had presented really the process for doing a sprint. So in a sense, it was a do-it-yourself sprint in a toolkit, was the overall idea. But in doing that, we captured quite a lot of the other work, the scenario work, and the more classic kind of academic research, where we just explored what firms did by interviewing and observing. So that exists still on the nextgenpsf.co.uk website, where you can go and have a look and have a play.
I'll certainly share that. That's great. I should say, amongst the panel, by all means jump in if you have questions. I've no anticipation of being fully in control of this conversation with you lot. So Glenn, in terms of creating a fully digital law firm experience, which is really what we're talking about, how far along do you think, how far along the road do you think law firms are in creating the kind of digital experience that clients deserve or need or expect?
Do you know, whether we get to a full digital experience, I think every firm will take an individual decision regard to that, because there might always be some circumstances where, strategically you actually don't want to be offering a full digital experience. But you know what, I was reflecting at the start of this session and yesterday, Caroline, about trying to produce almost like a time lapse of since when did the term digital start getting coined within the law firm market. And if we think about the world of when typewriters were still existing, pre-PC is like legal sector 1.0, where everything was still paper-based. And then, of course, when email started to come in, that changed the way that we communicated with customers. You internally collaborated, and that was almost like your 2.0, but it was still quite, still that a briefcase heavy, walking into court, still very document heavy, very reliant upon support resources. And that for me was like the 2.0. But to get from 1 to 2 was still quite a number of years. And then, no more than 3 years ago, COVID, we're post-COVID now, which is fantastic, but everybody accelerated their digital footprint to enable remote working. And that for me was like the 3.0. And guess what? For me, it feels like for many, so many people now have adopted that mindset of I'm now at 3.0, and yet AI and data analytics have been around a while, and yet those that are in the mindset of 3.0 are probably more able to adopt 4.0 and what AI means to them and what they can do with it, certainly in certain parts of the practices, that it feels like they might have that competitive advantage to get from 3 to 4. And yet, does it feel like if I'm still at 3, I'm a laggard now? I don't think it does. I just think the time lapse between 1 and 2 or 1 and 3 was really 2 decades. And yet from 3 to 4, we're only talking about a small number of years. So I don't know what 5.0 looks like. I haven't got there yet in my mind, but I'm interested to see what the panel think about it. But back to your question, the reason I posed that is it does feel like for those that are adopting that type of technology and that thought process, it's got to be a boardroom conversation. They've got to have that tone of the top of buying into that digital experience. The customer totally votes with their feet these days. The Amazon experience of 3 clicks and you can be anywhere came in an awful long time ago. I think all of us as consumers know that we want to be able to multitask and contact a firm and get an answer, whether it's through a chatbot or some other type of mechanism, quickly, swiftly, without having to necessarily have human intervention. And that might be a tactical decision for some firms. So whether that perfectly answers your question, I don't know, but I certainly felt like that time lapse was something that sprung to my mind when we were speaking about the theme of today's session.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I think we're not going to be focusing entirely on Gen AI, much like a lot of conversations at the moment. But I do think that will, thrown into the mix, we'll see a rapid acceleration. But we don't seem to be able to leave emails. That's one thing, do we? In terms of the client experience, there's sort of lots of attempts to leave email behind, but we seem to be fully wedded there. So but yeah, it'll be interesting to hear what the panel has to say on those comments coming up. But so I think if we go to we're going to go to Dan.
Hello.
Sorry, I stumbled there, didn't I? So I think picking up on Glenn's human in the loop point, probably. So about that point about, you won't ever sort of move away from humans. I think if we come to you because of that. So you've been working with the University of Liverpool, you've come up with structured information decision support system, which you call SIDS, which uses AI to help you assess whether a MedNeg case can be taken forward. To what extent do you think you'll still need people in the loop to sort of follow on from Glenn's point?
I mean, it's a simple answer, really. I would say 100%, specifically around AI. We've been using, we started our AI journey back in 2015. We were using the developed software in a live setting from late 2018 onwards. So that's 5 years. So we've had 5 years of using that system in our practice. And at every step of the way, that decision support system has been sense checked, maybe the right phrase to use, by humans. So the basic tenet of the system is that it saves us time and enables us to do more work with less capacity. But there isn't a single decision that piece of software makes that isn't sense checked by a human being. And I think specifically when you start to talk about AI, and we're now in the world of ChatGPT and all the rest of it, that is a premise certainly that we will continue to use to underpin our use of the systems. I think when you get to the stage when robot says yes, robot says no, without any human intervention at all, that starts to become a dangerous thing. Certainly when you're making legal decisions that are, extremely impactful upon people's lives. So from an ethical standpoint, as much as anything else, we built an ethical use policy into our software right from the start, so that we could never be, countered by a client that said, well, the software rejected your case or accepted your case. No, that has been sense checked by a human being. So, and I think, without kind of then embarking into a wider debate around the use of AI, I think that's something that needs to be discussed as AI becomes more prevalent. The fact that there are checks and balances around its use, particularly with, the burgeoning use of ChatGPT now. We're seeing, we've had previous conversations, and I mentioned talking to my nephews at university, and he reliably informs me that a lot of students are now starting a draft of most essays by putting it through ChatGPT to come up with a draft to give them a starting point rather than start with a blank page and then going from there. That was both astonishing and actually quite scary as well at the same time, because I'm not really sure the accuracy is there for ChatGPT. So I think the use of people with technology is just has to be endemic. I spent time 5 years as our director of IT, and I always used to use a really kind of simple analogy that IT is that. It's a tool, it's a pad and a pen. It's no more complicated than that. It's a hammer for a nail. So it depends how you use it, and it's there to provide a solution to a problem. I think when you start with technology and you work back to the problem, that doesn't work. I think you have to start with what we're trying to achieve, what we're trying to deliver, what we're trying to solve, and then the technology becomes the solution to that, whether it's AI or it's automation or it's a case management system or it's email or whatever it is. I think there's a link between the two, and I think the problem when you get into AI, and we saw this when we started our journey back in 2015, there's a lot of FOMO. So to coin a younger phrase, I think people are worried that they're going to miss out with AI, and I think that's totally the wrong way to look at it. I think you need to look at your business problems and then decide whether it's AI or any piece of digitization is the correct solution to help you solve that. And sometimes it's a people solution, not a digital solution. So that's always worth bearing in mind. But so, really kind of to sum our point up, the clues in our title. We've designed a decision support system. It's not a decision replacement system. It's not a system that replaces human beings. And they very much remain part of the process when that's used. It's there to support lawyers in decision making. Does mean we can cover more ground, we can filter more cases, but we do have a human safety net underneath it, which sense checks those decisions and keeps us on the right side of the ethics, I think, when we're using these systems as well.
And I'm going to come on, so that's in terms of the review, and I'm going to revisit the point about humans in the loop in terms of the way we actually engage with clients. But Alex, sorry to leave you last. So I already mentioned, and on the ChatGPT, I mentioned to Dan, my son's been doing his French homework on it, which is nice. And if any of his teachers weirdly be listening in, that's not true. Alex, I already mentioned there's a question, but I'm going to come on to it. I'm just going to ask Alex, and then I'm going to come on to your questions. Keep posting in the chat if you want to ask questions. I will come to them. So you've described automation, as I said, as table stakes. You've described low code as transformative, and you've been doing a lot of work in that space. Can you give us Radiant's always set out to do things differently. From our conversations going back for years, you've always tried to stir things up, which I like. And you sort of set out to sort of completely re-envision the contracting space. But anyway, so give some examples, if you can, of ways that you provide a digital space or spaces to manage and collaborate with clients. And then maybe go on to talk a bit about this. I think I might ask you a second follow-on question, actually. Go.
Well, why don't you ask me the follow-on question? Because I think that's a good starting point.
I know about Shingo. So I know from this is a bit of an exclusive, because I would probably normally want to write about this, but so anyone listening in, I don't think we've actually talked about this publicly, so it'd be interesting to talk about the philosophy and what you're doing to provide those spaces and some of the work you're doing with Shingo, and perhaps explain what that is.
Sure. So I really love Dan's point about we got to be more purposeful and start with what we're trying to achieve, and that's always the client, meeting the client's needs, right? And effortlessly, ideally delighting clients. I think we're kind of in that business, and Radiant's very much in the business of creating relationships. And so, relationships ultimately between humans, and humans are companies, and we want to create bionic lawyers, not robot lawyers, if we're going to do anything. So Radiant started off, what we do is we work for big companies doing their day-to-day contracts, and we've been using Lean, adopting Lean for a long time, the Toyota production system and so on, and we're currently running at 90% half-day turnarounds. Average in-house team is 30 days. So we kind of think we're the fastest on the planet what we do, but no one else will show their numbers. And we got there just by, we use document automation, obviously, because, it's not just table stakes, it's just bloody obvious. But a whole lot of other stuff. And we've been kind of feeling our way through. We try to fix the incentive problem by fixed price only and so on, but we're feeling our way through. And coming to Shingo's absolutely nothing to do with law. It is codified Lean. It was done by the Huntsman School of Business at Utah, an American brilliant act of marketing. They basically codified Lean and put a trademark on it. And they had the Shingo Prize, which is like being described by Business Week as the Nobel Prize of Manufacturing. So nothing to do with legal, but you look at it and you're like, oh my God, that's magical stuff. And what I particularly love about it, as well as codifying Lean and being helpful that way, is focus on system thinking, not in the IT system way, but in a much broader, how do you bring together a team with an aim that has tools and processes, standard work, and all of this stuff, feedback loops, yada, yada, to deliver a result. And the result has to be an amazing experience for clients. And, we've been very tentative on our journey of trying to fix the contracting problem, which basically means undoing all the damage lawyers have done of negotiating all the wrong things and performative dance of nonsense, fighting over stupid points, and instead get the focus on what actually matters and how do we, make contracting fun, fast, easy, and actually start creating great relationships. And as we kind of felt our way forwards, you bring in, and as Dan says, tools and so on, right? And they help. But I think we're at an interesting point right now of bringing it all together. And for me, the moment was Shingo, when I went, oh my God, I want one of those prizes. No one in professional services ever got one. So that's like a good thing that Alex to do. And basically it's a recipe for building a learning organization. And when your biggest competitors are the big four, that's kind of learning faster than them matters. And so learning how to add value faster, right? That's what the point here. It's not just learning for learning's sake. And so we had a kind of interesting experience last year. One was I got diagnosed with ADHD, which I don't think was a surprise to Caroline when I dropped this. And I gave these magic drugs, right? The drugs are awesome, kids. Try them at home. And it was kind of an interesting experience, because I started with I think we should talk about this stuff more. So I was like, oh my God, I've been fighting my whole life, one hand behind my back. And then the second was like, oh my God, now it's not fair in my advantage. Because one of the things ADHD gives you is the ability to kind of see connections. Like, it's a superpower. There's a lot of crap that comes with it. And when they give you drugs, you can suddenly build. And so that kind of takes you into the no code bit, right? Because I think far more actually interesting than GPT is no low code. And even though I'm writing a lot of code with GPT, so it's kind of meta. And what it allows you to do, therefore, is build things very fast to start to join the dots, right? Seeing the connections. And so we had a kind of interesting experience last year when we were going, well, Shingo, I was looking at their stuff and their system stuff, and they were doing a spreadsheet. So I was going, it's a database problem. It's a database problem. And started building drug fueled craze of 6 months. And basically reinvented ERP built around Shingo, right? And it was kind of an interesting experience because you start going, well, everything's connected and so on, but you start to suddenly be able to coordinate and align all of the different things within the firm. You could build knowledge management into this. It turned out you could build standard operating procedures into it. You could do all sorts of stuff. And that's been super interesting because it's kind of after 12 years of being out in the wilderness, figuring this stuff out, suddenly you had a ton of stuff coming together around, oh my God, it all fits, right? And so that's kind of led us to now we've basically got pretty much all our data going through BigQuery, which is Google's data lake product, but it's like, you're running a gazillion SQL queries every night to normalize everything. And what that's suddenly done is given us a new opportunity to think about how our relationship with clients work. Because we built our own amount of tracking because we work real weird. That's how you get the 90% half-day turnarounds. And so we had to kind of build our own system there, and we did that as a Rails app, and gives us incredible data into exactly what's going on. And we had a dashboard on that, and it's all very boring, and so on. But there was a shiny thing, right? Some of them even looked at it. By the way, it turns out if you send them an email on Monday morning with the data, that's like actually much more useful because no one's going to log into your system anyway, but they love the email. And so now we're doing something really interesting because a combination of combined data with, again, these kind of no-low code, you can start to build new ways of interfacing with the clients. And most importantly, you can start to design the firm from the outside. And it's slightly humbling experience doing this because you like to think you're client-centric, but there's nothing quite like looking and going, well, we do kind of organize around how we think, right? Rather than the client thinks. And so I just this morning got the first drop of the MVP, which is pretty cool because it's like, 12 months and then suddenly in 2 weeks you can produce it. So once you've kind of integrated everything, built that out, you're like, oh, this will be interesting and so on. And so we're looking to run a very collaborative process with our clients, which is starting with, what the hell do you need? Always a good question to ask, and going to be building it out with them to do it. But it's all about humans, right? It's all about
culture and structure, which I think is
all of the stuff that I spend all my day obsessing about behaviors.
For some people, I think this would be a bit, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be patronizing. Like, I think for some firms with perhaps different structures, because you're a company, aren't you? And I think
we don't have partners, and we're weird in every way. We're very focused on distributing decision making within the organization. We're part of that, I guess you call it, counterculture of the alternative model, right? Which is out. Yeah.
Can you sort of gone for the break things fast sort of approach, which doesn't sit.
We always do it the hard way.
I don't, yeah. And I know you sort of talked about, I'm going to come on to this question actually before everyone stops believing me that I'm going to ask questions. But yeah, no, I want to come back to for everybody here, to come back to the cultural point, because I do think before we can talk about technology, that's something that we need to address. So questions, to host and panelists, I'm not going to read the name. And this is to anybody. If there's one thing you would recommend a law firm needs to do to digitally enhance its client experience, what would it be? Anybody?
Ask the client what they want.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that we forget is, somebody that's grown up with and seeing the evolution of technology. So, I was born start of the 70s, so pre-email, pre-internet, pre-mobile phones, all of that stuff. You can remember, the remote control for the TV still being on a wire. That's literally how old I am. That is a big difference between people born in the last 20 years who have come into this world where everything's already there in front of them. For them, it's much more intuitive. So it's kind of learned behavior to adopt technology for people over a certain age, and it's just kind of part of the fabric of life for people that are much younger. And I think that speaks to our client base in that, exactly as Alex says, ask them what they want. Some people do not want technology or want to use it in a limited sense. Interestingly, my own mother-in-law is going through is working with the lawyer at the moment, and it's a local lawyer towards a traditional lawyer. Doesn't use email. I was amazed to find that there's still lawyers around do not use email.
I'm not in a good.
And it's not particularly helpful. Her case is taking ages and stuff like that. But he's of a certain generation, she's of a certain generation. It kind of works for them. Obviously doesn't work for anyone. But it kind of highlighted to me that people are at different levels. People, because we take it for granted technology and we use it every single day and our lives are immersed in it, we start to get more used to it. I think if you don't work with technology every day, then it's less normal for you. But I think the younger that you are, the more natural use technology is. So we should always be asking the clients.
So is that literally, that's your genuine answer? So there's not one, I mean, I suppose I'm being deliberately provocative, and actually from speaking to lots of law firms, I think my answer to the client experience thing would be, in terms of digital enhancement, would be provide digitally what needs to be provided in a well thought out fashion, working out their needs and work backwards rather than just providing tech for tech's sake, and streamline what you can streamline and automate what you should automate, but in terms of the things that don't need the human contact, and make time for people to interact in face to face. But there's not one thing. So it's literally the client, put the client first. There's not one magic I
think so. I mean, ultimately, without clients, then we're not sat here having this conversation, are we? So ultimately, what we're doing is to deliver for them. And we did a bit of analysis recently, just around we're starting to open new offices. So we're looking at different, what systems we're going to put in each of those offices. And I was amazed to find that we still do have clients that we ask, how do you want to be communicated to? And they still say paper. I mean, it's a very small percentage of what we do, but there still are people out there that ask for that.
You went paperless a long time ago, didn't you? But
we did.
So like years, actually, I think probably years before a lot of firms.
Yeah, it's 13 years ago, 2010 it was.
So, but if a client asks to be communicated with, you can.
Yeah, and we will do everything we can to kind of persuade them that it's actually more efficient to do this. But people just, if that's their preference, then why would we not want to deliver for them, even if it's a small subset of our entire portfolio of clients?
Feel free to jump in on the chat and respond to other people's comments. I probably won't read out. There's some comments about ChatGPT, which is a very valid point. I probably won't read it out, but feel free to jump in and chat in the chat while we're chatting. Can we come back to the structural and cultural barriers, perhaps? So, to what extent, perhaps, I don't know, Martin or Glenn, perhaps, to what extent do you see the cultural and structural barriers being the key issue in terms of becoming digital first or adopting technology?
I had a stab, Caroline, and I'm interested to see what Martin might have to say as well. So it has to start from the top. It can't just be one or two key stakeholders in the firm who has an idea and it's not supported throughout the business. Where I speak to firms regularly, where they live and believe it, it's where they've all got shared goals, or they've got financial gain shared across the firm that all drives towards that commonality. And I was, on a side note, I was lucky enough to be part of the LawNet judging committee last year, and one of the themes of the submissions was very much around the client services centricity of how they're investing. And it might sound so simple, but do you actually have, as a firm, somebody that lives and breathes, and the full-time day job is the customer journey? So do I have someone that is the client services director or equivalent type of a role? And is that a board level conversation that's happening within that firm? If somebody's not listening to client feedback and trying to understand maybe what went wrong or what they'd like to do differently, to both Alex and Dan's points recently, then I think you're probably missing a trick a little bit in terms of generating that cross-sell and repeat business. So it's just providing that avenue of how you can interact with me, how I can feed, what channel can I feed back to you to tell you how I want you to work differently for me, and then making that boardroom conversation. But culture is absolutely huge. People will vote with their fee. If there isn't a mechanism for me to ask a question to a firm while I'm multitasking in my day job, you're going to lose some people. And I think that's just a reality. We need to be able to understand and map out that preferred customer journey that you want to serve. And it might literally be take a day out of your agenda, get in that boardroom, get the pens out and start thinking about how do I want to be able to serve a client who just wants to do some preliminary research, and what are the touch points within my website or any other channels, and make available those pieces of content for you to make them easy, not gated. I think that's a key thing as well. Don't make them gated, otherwise you will lose footfall. And I think it breeds from there. And if you've got that desire to really understand the steps to serve a customer and how to make information available, you're on the right track.
How many firms do you think have their IT director on the board that you see? I'm putting you on the spot, but and actually that's not, I know it's probably difficult to quantify, but would you say the significant minority have IT directors on the board, or would it be sort of half-half, or majority? Because I tell you what, I think it's now key culturally speaking for IT heads to be on the board, as you've mentioned a couple of times about board conversations, and it makes perfect sense. Particularly, I think now we're at a real turning point, and the IT team need to be part of the conversation. But I don't know if you have a gauge.
I'd love to hear Dan's views on this actually, but if I was to put a number on it, I think it would be single-digit percentage terms.
I think so. Does anyone have a feel for that, Martin? I'm coming to you. But
I don't know about numbers, but certainly it seemed very important in the firms we work with to have the sort of hybrid who's perhaps a former fee earner who's developed an interest in this technology and become a partner and on the board. Or I think in some cases, few I can think of, there were people from a perhaps science background, non-law background, who trained become lawyers later. They're often these kind of hybrid maverick types maybe, and I think having them in that position to be able to have credibility as a lawyer and drive a technology is important. And then the infrastructure around that, the investment in innovation team, and the release in fee earners through giving them time to train and learn to write code in Python or whatever it might be. So that commitment, real tangible commitment to people on the ground doing innovation, I think is I think entangled with that role for someone at board level.
Yeah, I can agree more. The hybrid role, I think that having that kind of translator. But so tell me about with the firms that you've worked with. You've worked with a lot of firms from a very independent perspective. So tell me about what you've seen in terms of the structural and cultural barriers that arguably need to be broken down.
Yeah, I suppose the obvious ones like the partnership model not really being particularly conducive, billable hours model. Why would you automate something? You know the argument. And I think it varies, I think, again, fairly predictably according to this age. So you've got younger professionals saying, well, why wouldn't you use technology? I use that to live my life. And then the more senior people who perhaps are more reluctant, and then the people in the middle who can kind of see this middle of the age range, maybe, to put it simply, this can see the advantage, but are thinking, well, is it worth my while investing at time and effort to transition to the digital way of working, given I've got 10, 15 years to work. So I think that convincing that the middle group is perhaps a critical target to work on. And often that's done by, I think, moving the enthusiasts and the ones who've been successful in particular applications in particular areas around the place, and spreading the word through success stories and road shows and successful use cases.
If anyone's got any thing that they think works really well, please tell us, and I will read that out. If you've got any if you've seen anything that works really well. Just quick, Alex, because I know you've written about this quite extensively, so and you've filled your piece with diagrams and everything, like lots of triangles and
triangles, boxes and triangles.
Boxes and triangles, yeah. Anyway, so tell us, because I know that this is something you obviously feel quite passionately about, and you've talked about. Yeah, anyway, I'm just going to let you do the talking.
Well, Martin's right, isn't he? It's like, Charlie Munger, never ever talk about anything else when you should be talking about the power of incentives. And I don't think that you can make profound changes within a partnership in changing things, and you can't really do anything interesting without getting rid of the billable hour and the timesheet. So So there it is. I said it, but you knew I would. And I'm the CIO, by the way, as well as the CEO. So yeah, I think you have to do that because it's about how power distribution decisions get made and why people do the things they do. And fundamentally, it all comes down to behaviors. Everything is about behaviors. And this is a difficult conversation for lawyers because lawyers are cats. And generally, law firm management is seen as an exercise in cat herding. Right. And I don't think it has to be that way, but you need to really change a lot in order to create an environment where there can be honest conversations within the organization about, Shingo teaches us ideal results require ideal behaviors, right? Good luck having that conversation in the board meeting, right, of a typical law firm. But we've been pushing down to the team level. I'm not going to tell you what even the results are that you should be focusing on right now. You decide what the results are, what behaviors you're going to be doing. The team tracks each day what behaviors they're doing in terms of following those, and then what they need to change to the system in terms of the broad sense, which is our never-ending continuous improvement, to allow us to effortlessly delight clients. And that is a wildly different approach, I suspect, to the average law firm.
I'm going to bring Dan in because, so Dan, with the project you did this KTP with University of Liverpool. They came up with this idea. They said, we don't do much medical negligence work. We're gonna, maybe this is a sort of quite a niche thing, but you said, we're gonna try and automate the process, and we're gonna into this KTP. They got a big grant. I think it's 225,000, something like that. And this is all new, and you work in a partnership. Although actually, do you know what would be really interesting on this point? Because so perhaps we can talk about, because you're private equity owned, is that relevant here?
We are now.
Was that relevant at the time, or has it become relevant subsequently?
Well, we were a partnership when we started on the journey. We've since become PE owned, but we, going back to the points that all three of the other speakers have made, we did have that appetite at board level for digitization and for embracing technology to kind of to improve our service delivery and to improve the way that we did things, back office as well. At that time, even though we were a partnership owned by two single equity partners, so we did have that top driven kind of desire to kind of to embrace this type of technology. And that's only just been amplified really with the PE buyout, in that obviously our private equity owners have got a huge portfolio suite of different companies in all different types of sectors, and obviously quite a lot of them are technology driven as well. So their appetite has just really amplified our desire to go again in our systems, which is kind of what we're looking to do now. Just picking up on the previous point though, the kind of cultural point. The most difficult thing in our AI, our whole AI build, was not the technological side of it. It was the people side of it and the cultural side of it. So, I've worked in the legal industry for 27, 28 years this year. And and maybe it's a very overarching, I apologize for every lawyer that's on the call, but I always kind of generally see lawyers as being conservative with a small c, so that they're very kind of measured in their approach to things, which is right. And you've got to bring them on the journey when you're doing something that starts to push up against them. And we certainly had that. We absolutely had that when we started talking about AI. Literally within days, I was getting bombarded with questions around, am I going to lose my job? Or like really straight 0 to 60 straight away. What does this mean for me? And we had to go on quite a journey with our lawyers to kind of hold them by the hand and say, look, this is here to support you. It's not here to replace you. It's here to make it's an enabling tool, not a replacement tool. And we were only able to do that. And it took a good couple of years before people actually started to embrace it. And that was because we were able to produce repeatable results over and over and over again. It was quite hard to explain the underlying how I produce those results, and I'm not actually from a technical background. I'm from a finance background, so sitting there and trying to explain the finer points of algorithmic coding with lawyers wasn't the way to do it. What we were able to do is demonstrate how it could support them in their decision-making processes and save them time ultimately, which we were able to do. And that is how we started to change the culture. And, all of our lawyers involved in who use our systems are very comfortable with it these days. And it's gone through 7 iterations since, with their help and support. They've come in and done a lot of testing and kind of kicked the tires every time we've made a change. But definitely the hardest point was that cultural change.
But it's explaining it. It's going back to the language, isn't it? It's explaining it in people's language and showing them what problem it solves. I do think that that's where you need, again, coming back to people who understand both sides of the coin. I think sometimes it's an explainability, perhaps to use that term incorrectly, but it's about explaining it. I'm going to go to someone's made a really interesting point. I'm going to read the whole thing because I can read. So Jeffrey Heffernan said, hopefully this is on topic. Some people absorb information better when it's printed on paper. This may be due to age, habit, or perhaps neurodiversity. He has ADHD too. I have 5 screens in my office, not even including portable devices. But if I really want to understand a case decision or report, I print it out on paper. If paper isn't available, and e-ink screens can sometimes improve things. Wonder if anyone has looked at improving readability of text for those who read more efficiently on paper as compared to glowing screens. Anybody?
We can't go there. I mean, we're basically fully virtualized. We've got an office in Cape Town that no one bothers coming into. It's like going in and visiting my mate Ian. But everything we're doing is online and so on. And I got fed up when people are still printing out a 30-page contract, which we're trying to get rid of 30 pages and make it down to 5, but just to read it and then throw it away again. So we just I just stole the printer cable, and that was the end of printing at Radiant. And we'd kind of been virtual from the beginning. So I think that's, I understand that it can be a challenge for people, but the rate we're working and so on, I can't stop a client from printing out. Maybe they do, but we don't.
I have to say, I don't know if I'm an ex-lawyer, and I found it really hard to stop printing. I used to find I felt comfortable reading paper, and then my printer broke and I haven't managed to fix it. That was a long time, years ago. and then just got used to reading on screen, right? And sometimes I think, Alex, your point about pulling the cable, sometimes you have to go for the, I mean, I know this is about you yourself, but sometimes the hard approach, when you actually just can't do something, and then I adapt. I now wouldn't dream of printing, whereas before I used to feel like it wouldn't, I couldn't do my job properly if I didn't have loads of paper, whereas now I don't have paper at all.
From an academic point of view, I think I've weaned myself off finally, but there used to be a certain point in writing an academic paper where I wanted to print it out on, double spaced and spot those typos that didn't make themselves apparent on the screen. Somehow there was something about a pen and paper, but I've stopped now, honest.
My colleague just messaged me saying lies. I do not print. We're going to talk about that. Anybody got any questions, please ask. But so do you think you could I'm going to let you interpret this how you like. Is there such a thing as too much technology? Anybody jump in?
Well, I'll give you one aspect to it, which is the more we learn about stuff, the more tentative we become. And I just feel more ignorant every day. And therefore, I find it harder and harder to predict what I'll be thinking tomorrow on how anything should work. And so a real sunk home for me, and you're hearing this in the contracting world with all this CLM, contract lifecycle management discussions, is the need for flexibility and the ability to keep changing things. And so one of the big concerns that I have is you put a monolithic system in, and everyone's like, yeah, we'll fix it later. But like that's when the work starts, is constantly tweaking it, changing it, figuring out, and then going, oh my God, actually, we were looking at it all wrong and changing it. So I do think there is a real risk of going all in on something that's very inflexible in practice. However much your developers say we can change it, like how many developers are you going to keep running forever? And that is a huge issue. The other thing was, I was at the Shingo conference in Utah a couple of weeks ago, and once they got over the fact that 2 lawyers had turned up and they really didn't know what to make of that, but they're very polite. They're very polite in that tribe. They're very sweet about it. What was interesting is no one was talking about GPT. Like, that no one talked about it because it was just another bloody tool, and they'd seen it all. A lot of them had come out of manufacturing, particularly logistics and pharmaceuticals and so on. They'd seen everything, right? They'd seen everything come through, and technology changes, techniques changes, robots, yada, yada. And they don't talk about that. Right? Because what they talk about is purpose, behaviors, continuous improvement, involving the whole team, leadership with humility, respect to every individual. This is the stuff they get out of bed for. And these guys really know what they're doing, right? This is a serious group. It's not like the legal world. And they weren't talking about tools. And so I think the conversation can be utterly dominated by that.
Yeah. I think that because we've got a way to go, and we're not tech first, it becomes about the tech rather than about the delivery, if that makes any sense. I think that because once we become digital first, as if to the extent that we should, that therefore then it will just be delivering a service and technology will be involved in it. But I think the problem is right now that the industry is quite behind and that we're still not there to a great extent. I don't know whether if anybody on the panel wants to read, I don't know if you want me to read out these, there's some really great observations about still confusion with teams being digital is about the technology. That's Grant Beach, and thank you. Technology is an enabler and enables you to be digital, but the culture and mindset for digital has to be there first. We can agree more, I think. And then Vaughan Brandt that says, as been said earlier, technology is a tool, not a driver. IT has to serve the business, not the other way around. A lot of technology is a solution looking for a question to an answer. And then Dale White, totally agree with your comment, Grant, and pace of adopt. Oh yeah, I'm now just reading out the whole chat.
I could chip something in, Caroline.
Yeah.
Really comes from academic literature I've been reading, and it's, I think, pointing to, I think, an interesting question. So what's the respective role of the human and the technology in doing stuff? But now also, what's the respective roles of human and technology in learning for the organization and for the individual? And I think that's a really quite interesting extra question, a sort of extra layer. So how it plays out in practice and in different professions and contexts, I think, is still to be worked out. But it's going beyond thinking of digital technology as a way of automating processes and augmenting doing stuff, but also how we build on it, use it as a way to learn. So if we have machine learning, but also human professionals developing experience and expertise, how do the two interplay? I think is an interesting one to watch out for. No answers, but it's an interesting question.
You not got the answer, Martin.
Caroline, I think one thing that just circling back to your question around, can you have too much technology? I think the answer to that certainly yes. And it goes back to, you can be digital first, but as long as it's digital within a suite of other options, further to who your customer is. I think a great example of, kind of technology in recent years was obviously COVID, and platforms like this and Teams and everything else certainly enabled a lot of companies to continue to trade. Obviously, everybody had to go and bunker at home and avoid catching COVID, and these platforms were invaluable in people maintaining contact, human contact, okay, via digital means. But what it also did, it became a differentiator as well. So you also got a whole swathe of people whose jobs didn't enable them or worked in sectors where this wasn't possible to do. They had to maintain that human contact, and it became almost divisive as well, before you get into the whole working from home thing and working in the office thing. So that for me was a good example of how technology can be really empowering and enabling, but also divisive at the same time. And I kind of think it goes back to, if it starts with a human and ends with a human, it's fine to have technology in the middle, but it cannot be the only option, you know. So I think for businesses working towards digital first, that's fantastic. But if it's, you know, and there are certain businesses where it's only digital and it works perfectly well for them. I think in the legal sector, in terms of what we deliver, and it's obviously different disciplines, you know, most people don't get up in the morning and think, oh, I fancy me buying some legal services today. It's mostly a distress purchase, whether, you know, it's certainly in you know, in my sector, or it's born out of a necessity or need to solve something else. It's not a luxury purchase. And I think that's what you should always kind of keep at the forefront of your mind when you're adopting any technology, is you know, ultimately what it's there to serve. I mean, you know, there's a lot of technology is a solution looking for a question to answer. Well, that's a brilliant way to put it. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, yeah. And I think you just can't remove that human element from it, because it is humans delivering to other human beings. And
if there's anything good about recession, not really there is, but I think there's, you know, law firms are a bit overwhelmed with different systems. They don't talk to each other. So taking that question, and I'm conscious of coming to Martin before we wrap up in 4 minutes. So I'll just very quickly say, I think there's firms are overwhelmed by technology and technology not speaking to each other. And I do think that, you know, there was lots of engagement with startups, which is great. And then the recession, I think the downside, I think people should continue to invest for 100% sure. But the only good upside is that people start to rationalize and start to go, does this make sense? Or have we got technology for technology's sake? I don't know how long you're going to take to talk about your new project, Martin. We might have time for one more question afterwards, but I'm really conscious that I said that we'd talk about your research project, which is looking at the uptake of technology amongst UK and law firms and accountancy firms. So tell us a bit about it, because you're just kicking it off, and I know that you want volunteers, so we'll give links with this webinar.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's a new project funded by, again, the Economic and Social Research Council, whereas the other one was more exploratory. This is about adoption, and it's called an Innovation Adoption Accelerator. So that's what we're trying to do, help firms adopt technology, both in law and accountancy. It's with colleagues at Oxford Brookes University and Hyperscale Group. And we've got about 2 years, just over, to help firms at different levels of maturity, if you like, in adoption. But I'm particularly interested in recruiting firms to two particular paths. One is based around adopting things like Microsoft 365 Power Automate to tackle particular process problems, and then perhaps a bit more advanced industry-specific document review or whatever software in firms that are a little bit more experienced. So there's support for firms in the form of funding, of training, of masterclasses, mentoring, and a structured process, especially for the bit more advanced firms, to work in peer groups to support the adoption of particular technology, in quite a localized way in a particular practice area. And we'll be employing researchers. I'm recruiting in the next couple of days research assistants to do our academic research, but also lots of practical support and resources to help firms get involved and take on the technological challenge. So if Caroline will share the links, tips, technology and professional services, we're calling it, and there's a rudimentary website for the time being, and you can express your interest there. We'd love to hear from you.
And today, is it right that firms will get some, you've got a grant, some of the grant can go towards the
That's
firm?
right, so it can fund software licenses, bits of consultancy support, and so forth. Yeah,
so I think that sounds great. I think with 1 minute probably to wrap up, unless I've forgotten anything crucial. It's been really great chatting with you. Thank you so much, Dan, Alex, Martin, Glenn. I think everyone listening in, thank you very much for your contributions. It's a sort of a topic that you can go take from so many different angles. I hope that we've done it some justice. I've really enjoyed the conversation very much. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks all.